Hello, peoples, and welcome to Esoterica Cinema, the program where we take films and discuss the hell out of them. My name is Jason Peters, and with me, as always, is the man who records himself sleeping every night and streams it on OnlyFans for cash, Mr. Ryan Seybold.
Ooh, what's up, Jason? How's it going, buddy? Appreciate you, man. I appreciate your support. Every $20 counts. So the fact that you subscribed as literally my only fan to watch me sleep, been great. Working out great for old Ryan.
Jason putting the only in OnlyFans. Literally only fans. Yeah, absolutely. But anything for you, buddy. So, and it's not even a creepy thing, too. It's just you falling asleep helps me fall asleep. So, That's it.
Yeah.
But we're not here to discuss your weird, creepy OnlyFans station. No, we are here to look at a film. Ryan, do you have a description for us, sir?
I do. Today we're continuing our anime miniseries with Paprika from 2006. We are dropped into a confusing world where your literal dreams can be shared with a new invention called the DC Mini. That gizmo is being beta tested by its inventors when a prototype goes missing. Amongst the scientists is Dr. Chiba, whose dream world counterpart is mind detective Paprika, who's been going rogue and doing unsanctioned experiments on the side. Now she must team up with real-world detective Konokawa, along with her ragtag group of doctors, to track down the missing tech and find out who's behind the heist as the real world and dream worlds begin to blur together. The film was directed by Satoshi Kon, whose earlier film Perfect Blue was covered here on the early days of our show, back in audio-only format, though it is still here on YouTube. It's also another film coming out of the Madhouse Productions crew, pairing nicely with Rintaro's Metropolis that you'll find in this series. But Jason, I've got to ask you as always, did you like this film? Or do you wish it was all a dream?
Ryan, I'm going to be happy to tell you right here, as I always do in my opening statement. Now, Paprika is a visually inventive and sophisticated treat for the senses, okay? It eschews traditional plot and narrative beats in favor of these like surreal representations of dream worlds that weave in and out of reality. And while the film is at first a bit obtuse, it soon demonstrates itself to actually be surprisingly and relatively stripped down in terms of its storytelling. It never really gets too complicated, as it tells a lean story of new technology run amok despite best intentions, with a protagonist who's actually a metaphysical representation of our main character. So she kind of is and isn't the protagonist at the same time, which is fairly unique. We get a few small mysteries wrapped around a central conceit, and there's a sort of free-flowing looseness to it all as characters traverse these various realities and dreamscapes that are constantly colliding with one another. And while reality remains on shaky ground for much of the film, Satoshi Kon's certain and confident direction allows us to throw caution to the wind and just hang on for the ride. Paprika is not necessarily a deep film, but it is a visually interesting one that absorbed my curiosity and demanded me to stay with it through to its conclusion. Ryan, what did you think about Paprika?
Well, Jason, having covered Perfect Blue with you, and now Paprika, we've essentially bookended Satoshi Kon's career. And it's apparent he loved to dabble in some vague surrealist concepts. Where Perfect Blue took dark and gritty paths to reveal its story, though, I was delighted to see Paprika leaning more into the sentimental and nostalgic themes. I suppose everyone can take a little something different from a film like this, but to me, it was about finding balance in life, between chasing your dreams and staying grounded in reality. Don't lose the child inside you, but also be careful not to get lost in the sauce. Especially knowing it was Kon's last film, that final scene in the theater as the detective looks around at Kon's movie posters really got me in the feels. I very much enjoyed the vibrant and sometimes psychedelic imagery. Kon once again brought back his career-long art director Nobutaka Ike, so the art style was similar to Perfect Blue, but felt updated and fresh. Though this may not have been my favorite in our anime run so far, I can't find a single thing about it that I didn't enjoy. If you like a bit of a head spin, but don't feel like going full-on David Lynch mode, I've got just a movie for you, and it's called Paprika.
Love that, man. Yeah, so there's a few different aspects of the film worth discussing. I think where I'd like to start is with the overall theme of this film, which is what I feel drives most of the creative decision-making from Kon and his team. And I guess this could be distilled into sort of like the nature of dreams versus reality, kind of like what you were talking about, right? Like, where do they start? Where do they stop? Where do they overlap? And how does this get incorporated into the plot of the film? So, Ryan, let me ask you, is this a theme that you have seen a lot of movies explore? Do you enjoy these types of movies and storytelling? And then how do you feel Paprika did in its exploration of this idea?
Yeah, I mean, the first movie that comes to mind is, and I did see online that supposedly Nolan did take some inspiration from this, is Inception.
Sure.
Going into dreams and then going into other layers of dreams and what's real and kind of playing with that. Of course, you also have The Matrix, kind of the reality versus dreamscape. I feel like this movie started as one thing for me and ended as another. So when you talk about dreams, in the beginning of this film, you're playing in literal dreamscapes. Like you're going into someone as they're sleeping into their mind and examining their dreams. And then what's real and what's not. And you think something's real. And then by the end, you start to blur that line as the dreams kind of take over. But the defining moment for me is that scene in the theater where the two are talking, Paprika and was it Kodakawa? He is dressed as Kurosawa, if I'm not mistaken. And, and then he goes into a discussion and we go into some of his dreams. So dreams then for me start meaning more about Satoshi Kon's dreams, like his actual visions of the future, what he wanted to accomplish in his life. Like what did you dream about when you were a kid? What did you want to be? What did you want to grow up to be? And all of that. And it all kind of culminated again, like I said, in my opening statement, in that final scene where the detective finally goes to the theater after he has sworn off movies and doesn't like movies. And we find out that, he was an aspiring filmmaker, had a lot of interest in filmmaking and all of this. To me, it just kind of it's defined as, what do you mean by dreams? And I think that from a sentimental and nostalgic standpoint, this movie really did speak to me because we're podcasters talking about film. So what are we if not, dreamers that wished we were I grew up to be filmmakers. So, this one really got to me.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How about you?
So I think you kind of touched on it, right? Like quite a bit. I think that was a really nice observation that you had where it's sort of like, where do dreams end and sort of where do reality begin, right? Like dreams are just sort of these ideas, but they can manifest themselves into reality. And I think that's kind of the crux of what we're seeing Kon do over the course of the film is, taking a small seed of reality and then having it grow a little bit larger and a little bit larger. And as it grows larger, it also becomes more fantastic and becomes more surreal. And so it sort of drifts further and further away from reality. But at the same time, because of the device that they've put in where over the course of the film, we sort of are realizing this almost like dream-based singularity, right? Where basically what's happened is everybody who has utilized the DC Mini device, suddenly anybody who's ever used it has the ability to have their dreams be tapped into by anybody else that is using the DC Mini, and specifically, this person who's basically invading dreams and whatnot. And so I think that it's really interesting to see numerous examples of this. So like even right out from the onset, like that opening circus sequence, right? Like you see, the little clown car come up. And it's like, okay, yeah, we've seen that in a circus before. And then, okay, we're going to see clowns get out of the clown car. That's based in reality. But then it's like this huge, impossibly large person that gets out of the vehicle. And, that could never happen. So it's like, okay, we're sort of pushing reality a little bit. And then we see the rest of the circus sort of come in and start the parade. And then before long, we've got that, that main detective guy that you were talking about. He sort of disappears and flashes into this cage. And then all of a sudden, we've got people rushing at him, but they all have his similar face. And then next thing you know, he's Tarzan, swinging through the jungle. So it's like,
right.
Again, we see all the time in these dream sequences where they start off based on reality. And that's very much the nature of dreams as well. Like there's no such thing. You're not going to have some dream that's in an entirely new world that's never been seen before, right? It's always like housed around some sort of reality. It takes place in a location that with people that but then as the dream goes on, it becomes more and more obscure and more surreal and drifts further and further from reality.
Sure.
So I like the way that, the film was able to take that general idea and just use that as a constant theme, both with the reality of, the sort of like dream terrorist thing that's going on, but then also with respect to the dreams themselves, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that he did, Satoshi Kon, that is the director, did a very good job of kind of honing in on his messaging as the movie went along. So as you're saying, the movie starts very obscure, very surreal, a lot of surrealist ideas going on here artistically. But then by the end, you kind of get the messaging, right? Especially as you get to the theater stuff. He kind of lays bare, like, I was an aspiring filmmaker, and now I know, like, what all these dreams are about and stuff like that, with Konakawa kind of revealing this to Paprika. And then by the very end, in the final scene, when, again, he's in the lobby of the theater and he's looking at all of Satoshi Kon's posters for Perfect Blue and Millennium, Millennium Actress or whatever?
Millennium Actress, yes.
Yeah, a few of his other posters, landing with, what is it, the Dream Children or the Dream Kids or something like that, which, it's my understanding that the Dream Machine was supposed to be Satoshi Kon's final film, and then he passed away before it was completed. So it was basically his whole retrospective that he's looking back fondly on. And then with the old man that's in the wheelchair, that is kind of behind all of this, we find out towards the end of the film, his big dream was to walk again and to have control over his life and ultimate power and, all these things, because now he is feeble and old and unable to do certain things. And so, his dream was just to, have that control of his life. And, but, if you throttle into your dreams all in, then you get, again, like I said in my opening statement, you get lost in the sauce. And then, so that to me, it's all about that life balance. And that's the messaging of this film. To me, that's what it spoke to me, is just, you gotta anchor it in reality, but don't be afraid to still chase your dreams. But if you lose the balance one way or another, you're either gonna end up as Konakawa, who was unable to access those dreams because he blocked them out and wouldn't even so much as go see a movie or any of that because of his history with film and all of that. And so he's literally built a psychic wall to keep him from his dreams, which got wildly out of hand with the circus stuff and turned his life into a circus, literal circus. Or you go the other way and you shove all in on your dreams, which is what the old man did, and which blurred the lines between dreams and reality and sucked everyone else into his mess. So either way, when the scales tip one way or another, you're in for a very tragic situation. And so, I thought that Satoshi Kon did a really good job and told, like you said in your opening statement, a very succinct, pretty simple, direct story on a very surrealist canvas, So usually with these surrealist deals, like Inception, it's like, wait a minute, what did this mean? And blah, blah, blah.
We need to go in and put them under so they can go into a dream within a dream.
And you get lost on the spinning top at the end. But this didn't really have a lot of that. I feel like this was pretty cut and dry and left you very satisfied at the end.
That was one of the more surprising things that I felt, whereas I was kind of like, okay, let's strap in, let's get our notebook, let's get our red twine and our bulletin board and our pictures, and let's start to map this whole thing out so we can keep track of what's going on. But I was very surprised that it was actually a very straightforward and stripped down experience. Like I kind of, mentioned in that opening statement, where it didn't go all over the place. And even the dreams that it does introduce that could, very easily spin out of control, it keeps going back to those dreams, right? So like the big dream that we're supposed to be sort of, afraid of to a degree, even if we don't exactly understand why, we just know that there's something menacing behind it, is this giant toy parade, right? That's continuing to advance. We don't really know where it's going, but we do know that it's sort of like the source of either the main villain or the main antagonist or whatever it is. It's got a foreboding aspect to it. And rather than have that just be like one of, many different dreams that stack on stack on stack, like you're talking about, like an Inception or something like that, it keeps bringing us back to that, and it more just grows in importance and size and menace and all of that. But, it doesn't have all of these aspects to keep track of. And so one of the other aspects that I really like as far as the theme is, I also feel like it does introduce this theme of sort of like the ambiguity of life. Now, so much of reality is defined essentially by our own perception of it personally, like think about those times where maybe you were certain that someone felt a certain way about something that you did or didn't do. And like, you knew it. This person's upset with me. This person's, whatever, disappointed, only to find out later that like you were completely off base, right? Like you had them pegged completely wrong.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is, even in those moments where you are wrong objectively, when you're in that moment at that time that you're having that reaction, that is your reality. whether or not it
Sure.
was true when all was said and done, it was very true in the moment. And you lived with that feeling and you lived with that reality for however long you did until you got information that said otherwise. And so I feel like that's kind of also what's being explored with the nature of these dreams, you know, that start off as just dreams, but then as the film goes on, we find out that, again, the dreams are sort of coming to life and the dreams are achieving a sort of singularity with all of these other people's dreams that are all connected and they're all infiltrating into reality. And so as the dreams infiltrate the reality and the people perceive it as reality, the dream then becomes reality as a result of that, you know? So I feel like that theme is being, again, reinforced through just the way that the film progresses so that by the time we get to the end, once again, the dream is now reality and everybody understands it to be as such. Whereas before, everybody understood it to be a dream. And so it was just a dream. Does that make sense?
It was all a dream.
It was all a dream.
I used to read Word Up magazine. Yep. Biggie taught us that.
Exactly. Now, as far as the story is concerned, I do think that, first of all, have we noticed that it's kind of interesting that all of these sort of dream movies that explore dreams, and especially when people have the ability to go in, they're always sort of centered around this like thriller sort of archetype, right? Like Inception, it's a thriller, you know, what is it? The Cell, it's a thriller.
Sure.
Going back to like Dreamscape, it's a thriller. Like, it's very interesting. I guess the only one that doesn't is like Eternal Sunshine, which is more of like a drama, but it is kind of interesting that a lot of them set up, even, you know, Ghost in the Shell that we're going to do, which isn't strictly dreams, but still similar, right? Where there's some sort of ethereal villain or antagonist or something, and we've got to use this device to be able to access it and interact with it. And so
Sure.
it's kind of funny that they use that as, you know, a device similar with all of these sort of dream movies.
Yeah, I mean, dreams, you know, in and of themselves, you know, I mean, like you said, unless you're going in to do some mental therapy surgery like Eternal Sunshine, which then becomes a drama, you know, you really do have to kind of base it in sci-fi, because otherwise, how are you getting into their noggin? There has to be some kind of device or something. And then once you get in there, what are you doing in there? It's a fun sandbox, right? So it's like, it's really intriguing, I would think, as a writer or as a filmmaker to think, ooh, you know, once we get into dreams, like if I make a movie about dreams, I could do anything. Like I could, you know, be crazy. I could be wild. I could, you know, do special effects or visual effects. You know, in animation world, you could be, especially, you know, like Satoshi Kon did, you could be as big as and wild as you want because you're just drawing it. Versus, you know, if you're doing a live action, now you've got to create all this stuff with CG. It gets very expensive. But all these things play out super fun in an action movie or a suspense thriller or anything where you could arm your protagonist to the teeth with duffel bags full of rifles and, you know, as big as your imagination could go, that's your limitation with these dreamscapes. And even in Eternal Sunshine, in the drama side of it, again, very surreal and big, everything everywhere all at once, kind of another one of those films that plays in the surreal where, you know, it's like, a kung fu dildo fight can be something that happens on screen. We could bring that to life. And that, for a lot of viewers, was super fun, you know, to say that you could play in the realm of the silly as well. So, I think that once you start going down the dream road, because of the technology you need, it just lends itself well to either super silly shit like a Brazil or, like I said, Eternal Sunshine or something like that, or It's Everything Everywhere, or you go Matrix or Inception or, you know, one of these type things. And it's, you know, it turns into more of a thriller, or even there's been some horror stuff. I mean, let's not leave out, I've got the complete collection right back there, the Nightmare on Elm Street series. Which had Freddy Krueger. It was all based on dreams. So
no, that's true. There is a shared DNA there, definitely. Let me ask you, because like, so in terms of the actual Paprika character, so not like the doctor that she represents, but act like Paprika. Did you know like right off the bat or at the beginning of the film that was a representation of the doctor, or did you find that to be kind of a mystery too? Because like a lot of the first half of the film for me, I spent wondering like who and what exactly Paprika was. And I wasn't sure if that was like something the movie did intentionally, or if I like missed some information up front that told us that. And so it was just me that was kind of lost for a minute.
Yeah, it kind of came together slowly. The thing about it, and you know, we could all be forgiven, is they're throwing so many surrealist concepts out there that you're not really sure what is linking together and what your truth is. You know what I mean? Like, where am I grounding myself? When you start out with a circus scene, and then the guy wakes up in bed and he's got this device, and then we're with these doctors and they're just throwing a lot at you. And the dude's stuck in the elevator, and you're like, is this what's going on? And so even in reality, there's some like kind of hyper real or silly things happening.
Yeah.
If I recall, Perfect Blue had some of these surrealist concepts as well, with, you know, who was the singer and who wasn't, you know, and what was really going on and who was the murderer and so forth. But Kon reeled us in on that one, so I was just kind of trusting him to bring it all together. And I would say by the second act, I had a pretty firm grip on what was going on.
Yeah.
So
I
he
agree.
did a pretty good job of leading us along and not leaving us completely in the dark like a lot of these movies can do.
Definitely, yeah. Even with the case of like the dream terrorist, so to speak, you know, the one who like stole the DC Mini. Like at first I thought maybe Paprika was like the dream terrorist herself,
Sure.
and it was somebody that stole the DC Mini, and she's going in and out, and maybe she's even like a renegade or a vigilante or something where she has good intentions, and you know, she's going to be like Dream Batgirl, and she's going to go and save these people in their dreams and stuff like that. You know, that's usually how these things go. Again, The Cell, Dreamscape, these movies all feature somebody who's going to infiltrate somebody's dream who is in some sort of distressed state. And through resolving and killing their, you know, the object of their nightmares, they're going to save them mentally so that they can go back to having a normal life. And so I thought the film did a good job of not necessarily tipping its cards as to who or what exactly Paprika was right up top. And then as the film progresses, you know, it throws a few different potential suspects at you, right? That's where that mystery thriller kind of DNA comes in a little bit, even though it's not tonally a thriller. I think that the plot follows a lot of those sort of like archetype moments. So, you know, it ends up being even the reveal of who does end up being the sort of like dream terrorist, which is this guy, Osanai, I believe is how you say his name.
Okay.
And he's the one who's working with the head of the institute, who's the Dr. Saijiro. That's the guy you mentioned who, you know, is paraplegic and wants to be able to get his legs back so he can walk and all of that. But that was another thing that I liked as well, is that I liked that the script made the antagonist sympathetic to a degree, right?
Sure.
Like if you actually like take a step back, like not only was he not evil, he was probably right, right? Like he's like, guys, you know, let's go ahead and try out these DC Mini things. But like at a certain point, if things get out of hand, we're going to have to shut it down. And then things very much get out of hand. And so he's like, hey, we got to shut it down. But then our protagonist is like, no, we still got to use it. But then me as the audience member is like, I don't know so much about that, Doc. This guy might have a point. We've got some like really horrible stuff going on. All these doctors are going crazy because of, you know, being exposed to what's going on with other people going in and out of their consciousness and all of this, right? Like we're seeing the detrimental effects of it. And I think, you know, again, you know, when you have an antagonist who's not just a Bond villain who's like, let's destroy the world for reasons that don't make any sense.
I don't expect anything from you except to die and be a very cheap funeral.
It just really adds a richness of character to an antagonist and a villain when they actually have very like reasonable and, you know, borderline altruistic motivations, you know, for what they're doing on their end.
Sure.
And I liked that this film did that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, kind of going back to what I teed up top, it's just like, to what end are you willing to go to chase your dreams? And if your dreams could have, you know, be totally just and morally upright or even self-serving, but innocent, you know, like in the case of the old man. So, you know, he wanted to walk, he wanted to take control of his own life again and blah, blah, blah. So great, good for you. Go chase your dreams. But when you chase your dreams with everything and the scales tip to that end, you're going to take down people with you and you're going to make some sacrifices when you get totally blinded to what the repercussions of your devotion or fanatical chase of your dreams can be. I think that, you know, there could be some downfall there, if not for your own sake, you know, for others around you. By the way, so that was maybe one of the only through lines that I was a little confused on, and I wanted to get your take on it, was Konakawa's storyline in regards to We start with the circus and like all the nonsense that's coming along with that. That's his opening sequence. We find out Paprika is going rogue and like working on this guy and with the DC mini and so forth. Then we go down the way of finding, seeing several cutaways, many throughout, including towards the end of the film. It kind of ends with this as well, where he's chasing someone gets shot. It appears as though it's like a case of his that he was on. Somebody died in the process and he regrets. There was a shooter at the other end of the hall and he's like treading, the floor turns into, some kind of goo or, gets really slippery and he has a Bugs Bunny moment. So, but then once we get to the middle of the film, we find out by way of that theater scene where he's sitting down and dressed as Kurosawa and all of that and going into the field, that he actually really did like movies and knew very much about them. He was describing shots and compositions, different camera theory and so forth to Paprika and saying, no, I know about this stuff. I just kind of choose to forego this because I had a bad situation and I couldn't chase this and so forth. I had to do something else. And then by the end of the film, he goes back to that detective stuff. So do you think that, what was the deal with that like hallway scene? Was that in fact, was your takeaway that was a case gone bad? And that, that he was an aspiring filmmaker at one point, and then gave that up to go be a detective or a police officer? What was your stance on his storyline?
Yeah, I think that basically what's going on is I think that he sort of represents the idea of like running from loss, specifically loss based on something that you desire very, very strongly.
Because I would, just real quick, just to clarify, I would say that you stated up top that Paprika is a very interesting protagonist, but I would almost propose that Konakawa is our protagonist in so much as we start and finish our film with him. He is kind of the one that is changed throughout by all these dreams. Paprika is not. She kind of is what she is throughout. We get our biggest character arc, I would say, from Detective Konakawa. So as our protagonist, I was just kind of wondering what you saw as, what your take on his story would be.
So yeah, I think basically kind of what's going on is this is sort of an examination of another theme that comes up, and that's the idea of sort of like running from loss and running from loss that you have a particular passion for, So we learned very early on that like, again, he has this freak out thing. I don't want to see any movies ever, blah, blah, blah. And then it turns out like, he doesn't want to because he loves movies so much. And he's so like distraught that he wasn't able to pursue his passion as a filmmaker that he just has like completely closed it off and, went in the entire different direction from being an artist and became a cop. Right.
Okay.
About as much of a 180 as you can do. And then I think that when you look at the hallway,
you still get to shoot stuff for a living.
But I think that, what we see from the hallway sequence is I believe that was a case that went south. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that was something where, he was trying to protect somebody and wasn't able to do so. And the guy ended up getting shot. And I believe, and I think it's up to interpretation. So, this isn't 100%, but I think what's going on is that, we get a shot later as he's sort of, because he keeps going over it and over it. And then when we get to a certain point, it shows him like running down the hallway and exiting at a door at the very end as he's sort of like looking back with this expression of fear on his face. And I believe that that's him also running away from that case. I believe that perhaps that guy was a victim who got shot, and rather than sticking around to see it through or save the person or catch the baddie, I think that he also ended up just running away from that situation as well. Just, based on fear and all of that. So I think that these two things sort of haunt him, right? This idea of running away from something that when he looks back on it, he wishes that he had stayed and engaged with it and faced up to it and had the bravery to pursue it, in spite of all of the potential challenges and difficulties and things that he could lose. So that was my interpretation of that. And yeah, I do think that, in terms of when you talk about a story arc and, generally speaking, our protagonist is the one that's going to have that arc. It's definitely more so for him than Paprika / Doctor. But I don't really think that anybody has too huge of an arc in this film either. I think that's just not something that we really see too much, even down to, some of the developments like the idea of the female, I forget their names, but the female doctor and then, the large overweight doctor that's responsible for creating the DC mini. I felt that moment at the end was kind of a little cheap or not deserved, where it's like, oh, actually, turns out that I've loved you this whole time. And I was like, at that one where I was like, wait a minute, really? Because I don't really buy that. Like, nothing about your relationship over the course of this film is really like tipped its hat towards any sort of like attraction, mutually or otherwise. And so like, I didn't 100% buy that, but I do appreciate that they were like, well, we don't really have too much emotional growth or too much of an emotional arc. So like, let's have her go ahead. And it turns out that she's loved this guy the entire time. And by the end of the movie, she's going to call and say, hey, we're having a marriage. I'm going to change my name and we're getting hitched. And I was like, that just came a little bit too far out of left field and felt a little bit too much like a device instead of like an organic character development.
Yeah.
I don't know how you felt about that moment.
I would agree.
Now, Ryan, let's discuss the visual style of the animation and kind of how that plays into the overall viewing experience. So I've long felt that Satoshi Kon has like one of the most distinctive and unusual styles in Japanese animation. And it's one that ultimately plays perfectly to his stories, because his stories pretty much without fail explore this sort of convergence of reality and a dream world, or reality and unreality, or lack thereof, however you want to call it. And I think that his animation style does the exact same thing, where much of it is actually super realistic, compared to like what we saw in Metropolis or something like that, right? Like the faces, the expressions of the characters. They have this sense of being very authentic, while at the exact same moment being very exaggerated, right? Like the physical stature of Dr. Takeda that we were just talking about, right? Like the massively obese inventor. And so I think it works perfectly for his stories, because everyone's animated authentically enough to be part of the real world, which is where ultimately his stories do take place. But they're also exaggerated enough to exist outside of reality and reflect that unreality. And so I think by doing that, it sort of creates this harmony of like visuals that go along with the theme and even the, audio and the score and the rest of Kon's mise en scène. Like, even if it's a skewed harmony, so to speak, like it's a harmony nonetheless, right?
Sure.
So yeah, so I found that pretty interesting. I don't know if the animation stood out to you in any sort of way.
I was delighted to see how much this reminded me style-wise to Perfect Blue. Like I said at the top, he's using the same art director. He used Nobutaka Ike as his art director his entire career. So I guess all of his films have a very similar vibe. You could just track the animation technology being used and how vibrant the colors are, if there's been a restoration or what have you. But I did feel like this Paprika, meaning had a lot cleaner, fresher, more vibrant polish to it than Perfect Blue. But it's also a more psychedelic, uplifting, kind of nostalgic story, whereas Perfect Blue, had a lot more adult themes to them. It was really darker, narratively. So this is one thing that I've been very delighted to really explore on this anime miniseries, is just how many different styles exist within the anime genre. I mean, we started with Akira, that was known as, a pioneer in that new generation of anime that was more serious and dark, didn't have the big cartoon eyes, big wide eyes that anime was known for, really played with the distinction of hero or anti-hero, who's the antagonist, wasn't clear cut. A lot of the things and themes that we talked about in that episode. Then you get to Metropolis, and they went almost the exact opposite, where you had super cartoonish characters, way over the top cartoony things happening, still dealing with adult themes, and a lot of concepts, sci-fi, science fiction concepts and things like of that nature. But then you get to, again, Paprika, completely different vibe. And then I'm expecting Ghost in the Shell to be even more different still, with more of the action-y kind of science fiction side of anime that, kind of got touched on in Akira, but got taken to a whole new level by films like Ghost in the Shell and Evangelion and stuff like that. So we'll see.
I think it's worth noting that Kon's one of those people where his animation style is so distinctive that, like, even if you don't know the source material, you can still tell it's one of his works, like his style of animation, right? Like there's
Sure.
certain artists over the course of, all mediums, but like fine painting, right? Like a Francis Bacon. You see one of those, if you know who that is and you know what his style is, you know it immediately. So even if you see a work of his that you're not familiar with, you still know it's part of his work, right?
Right.
The visual distinction of certain filmmakers, right? Like I know we were just talking recently, we don't love him, but like Brian De Palma, right? Like if you're familiar with his visual language, you can sort of see a movie that you don't know is his, but still know that it's his just based on the way that he's framing things and the way he's executing certain shots,
Sure.
Whether or not they're necessarily all, make the best movies is separate, but there are certain people that just have such a distinctive visual language. And here in animation, a large part of that is the actual quality of, the drawings. And again, just Satoshi Kon has such a distinctive style that whether it's Tokyo Godfathers or Paranoia Agent or Paprika, any film that he's done, once you've seen one or two of those and you know what his style is, when you see a scene from one of those other works, like you absolutely 100% already know it's Satoshi Kon.
Right.
I think that's a really wonderful quality to have. Again, it doesn't guarantee that your work is good in and of itself. This one obviously is, but it's very cool that you can have such a distinctive style that you can just see a frame of it, hanging on someone's wall and be like, oh yeah, that's Satoshi Kon right there. So
yeah, because usually with animation, as we know it in the West, so much of that style is brought out by the production house, right? So like Pixar movies, for example, all look very much the same, regardless if it's, Brad Bird or any of these Pixar directors that are making these films. Pixar is its own brand, and you want that all to feel like a Pixar movie. That's what the audience expects. Disney animation, going all the way through the 90s felt very much that thing. DreamWorks, very much that thing. For whether it's Despicable Me or How to Train Your Dragon or Shrek, that has a vibe. And so, but anime, on the other hand, is very much auteur-based. And that's, I guess, what I was trying to say a minute ago, is like, that's been one thing that's been really cool for me, is seeing how distinct each filmmaker's animation style is, and not necessarily the production house. Because we got this and Metropolis, both from Madhouse. Which, Rentaro helped create.
They look entirely different.
They look entirely different, but both under the same studio house. So, I was really excited to see how anime treats their filmmakers and animation stylings. And a lot of these filmmakers are very artistic and know what they want to create. They have a true vision. And you see that all the way through their careers. Even so much as I believe there are, no pun intended, mirroring shots in Perfect Blue and Paprika, where you see in Paprika, Dr. Chiba walking by a window, or a mirror, and you see a reflection of Paprika, her dream counterpart, in the reflection. And in Perfect Blue, you see that as well, with the singer and then the murderer kind of in the reflection as she looks over her alter ego, if you will. So he really liked to play with some of those similar shots that you would see, again, from a filmmaker, where it's like, oh, this filmmaker always loves this one shot, Wes Anderson, the everything is perfectly symmetrical shot, this guy's got a flavor too. And that's really neat to see how Japan treats its auteurs in this genre.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. A Miyazaki film couldn't look more different from a Satoshi Kon film, right? And all these people that you're talking about. And yeah, it is very cool that each one of those gets to inhabit this very different sort of feel based on the auteur at hand. And we also didn't, mention this specifically, but I do really love the representations of the dream world here in Paprika. They're all outstanding, right? We've got the toy parade, which every single time it showed up on frame, I was delighted, right? Love this giant, crazy, like not quite good, not quite evil parade. The circus sequence up top was really wonderful. Yes. And then I especially loved the sequence where I think it's like about halfway through, but it's where Paprika's walking through her dream, and then, it's based in reality, but then reality sort of turns into a mirror and shatters. And then suddenly she's walking backstage where all of the people in her life are these dolls, but then the dolls have these heads that are like twitching and buzzing like flies, at which point she becomes a fairy who's flying through this giant cavernous honeycomb, and we find out that's Humero's hollowed out body. It becomes tree roots, and they start to attack her. And so, part of as well of working within this dream world is that you're doing that so that you can do a lot of these really visually imaginative types of sequences, right? Like that's the crux of what your audience is here for. Like, we want to see something surreal. We want to see something fantastic. We want to see something magical.
Right.
Again, even talking about the movies, that it sort of comps to, Dreamscape, The Cell, Inception, that's the hook of those movies is you get like, you're there for these wonderful, wonderful, wonderful visuals that can't exist outside of a film like that. You can't take a Scorsese movie about gangsters and then just all of a sudden put some surreal dream sequence in it like we're talking about here. So
nobody likes
that's
that.
also just a huge that's also just a huge draw for this film is it, allows you to play in that space. And then on top of that, because it's an animated film, you really get to play in that space because you're not constrained by reality,
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, you get to be a goofy goober.
And I'm also a goofball, and a wingnut, and a knucklehead McSpagatron.
If you don't, then you're just doing a Who Shot JR sequence. You know what I mean? Like, then you just wake up and be like, oh, it was all a dream. And then your viewers feel betrayed.
Exactly.
Let's get wild. Let's get goofy with it. And because you set the table in such a fantastical landscape that we could do anything. And not only is it a dreamscape, not only is it animated, but it's anime. And anime does that better than anyone, I would say.
Yeah. And one of the other aspects of this film that I appreciated and was impressed by was just the density of the dialogue. It doesn't shy away from lengthy descriptions, diatribes, not to mention good old fashioned, just like Alice in Wonderland strings of nonsense, right? As we see these doctors sort of succumbing to this DC mini induced psychosis, right?
Sure.
As a matter of fact, like for the first minute, I wasn't even really sure. By the way, let me just ask you this. So did you watch this film in US dubbing? I always ask you this for each of these. US dub or the original Japanese?
This was my first watch, so I watched it subbed.
Dude, you're so consistent with that.
Yeah.
I will admit. So this one I actually did end up, even though it was my first viewing, I did watch it with the US dub, and it was very strong. We'll get to that in a minute, but there was a moment where the first time that the main doctor, starts rattling off that nonsense when he's talking to everybody in the hospital, like I wasn't sure if like something was going on with my dub. Like, was I hearing this incorrectly? Like those aren't real sentences that he's creating. Those are real words, but they don't form like an actual sentence that makes any sense. And then after just a few more seconds, I was like, oh, okay, this is expected. This guy's starting to go crazy a little bit, but yeah, again, oftentimes I feel like when you get that US dub, right, especially because oftentimes Japanese tends to be a bit denser of a language. So you'll notice that oftentimes US actors, when they try to capture the breadth of dialogue, they'll try to like race through it because they have to use so many more words to express the same ideas. Okay. You didn't get that sense. And I do wonder if maybe there was like they had a translator who was able to sort of take the ideas and whittle it down into a little bit more expressive dialogue. Cause I felt like all of the actors and again, the US dub were, very expressive. They reflected their characters very well. They were able to put a lot of emotional weight, both on the crazy side, the serious side, all of that. So, but yeah, I was really impressed because again, so often, you do sort of feel like the dialogue tends to be a little rushed, or you can tell that it was probably a little bit more resonant in its original language and its original Japanese. But here I was delighted that the dialogue was just, again, very dense, didn't shy away from a lot of these sort of metaphysical descriptions, used a lot of language. So yeah, I was really impressed with the dialogue on this one as well.
Nice, dude. Yeah, I didn't have any problems with the subs. Everything felt as it should. I got the gist.
Additionally, I also thought the score was very strong. It's one of those scores that doesn't really bring a lot of attention to itself because it's not overly dependent upon.
Right.
And, but when they do use it, it always hits the right sort of tone, so there's these sort of like haunting ethereal moments when it's supposed to be a little uncertain. There's these like upbeat electro pop D&B kind of songs, which I'm pretty sure is Satoshi Kon's like dude, like, or maybe it's female, I don't know, but I think he uses the same person to do his scores, because like so many of those sort of like electronic pop D&B moments in this film felt exactly like the main theme for Paranoia Agent, which if you or anybody else is not familiar, that is one of the all-time bangers of intros to television shows ever, anime or otherwise. Like the Paranoia Agent soundtrack is so insane, the theme song, but it's also just like, it's so unique and it's so wonderful. I love that one. But yeah, I did think the score was really, really effectively used.
Yeah, we're 3 for 3. And again, circling back, like that is something else that I've been very interested in, is just how all 3 of these films that we've seen now have treated music completely differently, but very much important to the overall vibe of the film and story of the film. So again, in Akira, you went into great detail on how they created that score, and you even went so far as to say that it was one of the greatest scores in film history to you.
I maintain that,
I can't disagree with you. But just all the work that went into that. Metropolis, all of a sudden we get New Orleans jazz and all this like swanky old school style 50s bops. And we get, end it all with Ray Charles. And then in this, it's handled completely differently as well. So, you get a lot of, like you said, ethereal music, they really flesh out those dreamscapes. They play with a lot of the, surrealist themes and so forth with the musical cues. So, I'm very curious to see what Ghost in the Shell brings. I'm expecting more techno vibes, but we shall see. Kind of with that movie being so intertwined with the lore of The Matrix for me, I'm curious to see if the soundtrack kind of follows suit as well. Plus, we're deep in the mid-90s with that, where techno and electronic music is just starting to get a huge resurgence. I'm curious how that fares to kind of cap it all off. But I will say we're 3 for 3 in the music department on this one.
Absolutely. I agree. And with that, Ryan, we can go ahead and wrap up this discussion of Paprika, as we do every episode, with 3 scenes, where Ryan and I point to the 3 scenes that we feel best represent our overall response to the movie being discussed. Ryan, as always, I am going to give you the honor of kicking us off with your 3 scenes for Paprika.
Well, we'll see if you live to regret that. My 3 scenes are the detective's dream. Really the first one specifically. I think it really sets up what you're about to see. The circus, the running down the hall. I think that's our first introduction to just a lot of the surrealist concepts. And just kind of kicks the whole movie off and jumpstarts it. The second would be the parade. It really confirms what you are in fact seeing. So everything that it tees up with that detective sequence and kind of plays upon some of those concepts. By the time you get to the parade, it's just really foot on the gas, all in on that. And a homeboy that is caught in the parade throughout the film just looks so damn happy. You almost just want to leave him there. They're trying to rescue him and get old boy out because the parade is marching to his ultimate doom or demise, but they're like, no, leave me here. And it's like, maybe just leave him there. Looks pretty good. And then last one is the detective and Paprika in the theater, which is when I sort of got the message here, at least what the film was saying to me personally, just as far as, chasing your dreams and a lot of the nostalgia, especially dealing with filmmaking and me always being an aspiring filmmaker growing up as a kid and wanting to chase that, really kind of talked to me. And then getting down to the nitty gritty about, so like I said, some of the film theory and camera concepts and blocking and staging and so forth. I thought that was like kind of a wink and a nod where the film was talking to me personally. It was like, hey, we see you. We know you're watching. These are your dreams, Ryan. I'm like, yep, those are my dreams too, buddy. How about you, Jason?
Yeah, well, we've got one similar, which is about on par for us. The first one, just with, that circus dream up top, same as you. I thought I did a really good job of establishing theme and tone and the fact that we're going to be experiencing a lot of visual splendor and imagination. It also does something which we kind of touched on up at the top, but one of the themes that Kon specifically was looking to really drill into is just the idea of something small growing into something larger over and over again, which we did sort of touch on, but maybe didn't specify to that exact unique degree.
Who doesn't want to go there?
And so, you know, again, we see this constantly throughout the different dream sequences, throughout the plot is, you know, we start with a small seed of something and then it grows and grows and grows.
Mm-hmm.
And this is also reflected in my second scene, which is, I had mentioned earlier, that Himuro honeycomb flight, I'm going to call it, right? Where she ends up becoming the fairy and is, you know, going through the big cavernous honeycomb of Humuro's body before he ends up getting these roots and attacking her. And then even then we get that sort of fake out moment where, you know, she wakes up and she thinks that she's, you know, out of the dream, but then, oh, lo and behold, here comes more crazy shit. And it turns out she's still in it, you know?
Yeah.
And then as far as reinforcing that something small growing into something larger scene, we also see this in my third scene, which is it's a sort of small, quiet moment where the head doctor and our main character protagonist, they're driving in a car during the rain. And Kon takes basically a moment to show us the windshield and how there's this like little droplet of water, you know, from the rain that's coming down there. But as water does, it sort of collects and turns into a tiny series of little tributaries that all sort of then come together to make one sort of large stream that's like dripping down the windshield. And he specifically put that scene in there as a moment to, again, reflect that theme of just in the same way as the dreams, you know, these water droplets start as individual water droplets. They hit the windshield. They then start to like come together and form slightly larger little streams, which those streams then run into each other and, you know, create one large stream. And, you know, we see that it's the same way that the dreams happen. You know, we get these individual dreams from all these individual people. And then as the film starts to progress and continues to progress, those dreams then, you know, fold into one another and become aspects of each other's dream and then turn into a larger dream before, you know, we've got the very end where the big toy parade has, you know, infiltrated all of the other dreams and everything is happening at once. And so just to sort of put that little moment in there where it's a nice visual, but it's actually saying a lot about the filmmaker's intention behind the movie. I thought that was very nice. So those are my three scenes. Yeah. For a formal star rating, I'm going to give Paprika 4.25 out of 5 stars for all the reasons that we just discussed. How about you, buddy?
Giving this one a solid 4 stars. This is a really, really good movie. It was not my favorite of the 4 so far. But I really enjoyed this, and I would watch this again and recommend it.
Yeah, dude. I mean, we're on a series of bangers, man. You're talking about Akira, Metropolis, and then Paprika. So, and then as Ryan's been mentioning, you know, we're going to close out this little miniseries with Ghost in the Shell. Neither of us have seen that one before, so we're both really looking forward to it. But yeah, I mean, again, dude, that's 3 bangers. I think, you know, we've given the last 3 like 5, 4.5, and then 4 and 4.25 for this one. So when the weakest film in your series is a 4 out of 5 star film, that's a damn good series. So
and completely different.
Just as much as
I can't stress that enough is how completely different these films are. Completely different experiences, different vibes, different tones, different filmmakers, different auteurs. So, yeah.
Which is funny because they all belong to the same general genre. Like, you know, these would all fall under that classification of science fiction, Japanese animation, you know, but each of them has such a distinctive idea of what that entails. So it's been really cool. I agree.
Yeah.
So to you watching, if you enjoyed this review of Paprika, we do invite you to like and subscribe to our videos and channel. As we've been discussing, we're in the middle of our sci-fi anime miniseries right now. So if any of the films that we just mentioned interest you, do feel free to check those out. And also please leave us a comment about what you thought about this movie, Paprika, or our review of it. We always love to hear from those of you that take the time to watch our reviews, and we truly do appreciate it. So for myself, Jason Peters, and my good buddy, Ryan Seybold, this has been Esoterica Cinema. Keep on appreciating film and enjoy the movies.